All right, everybody, we are back for another episode of Ozone Late Night, and I am happy to welcome back just about a year later. This is where the genesis of this show came from. About a year ago, a little bit more, year and a month maybe, something like that. I had talked to Mr. Jason Howell when he was still with the Twit Network. At that point, I kind of shortly thereafter dubbed myself the Twit Jinx because I talked to Aunt Pruitt and then you, Jason, and then there were layoffs, and I went, oh, nobody's ever going to talk to me from that network again. Uh-oh. Great. So I am welcoming back Jason Howell, now of Techsploder.com or at Techsploder on YouTube. Yeah. Jason is the host of both the Techsploder podcast and AI Inside with Jeff Jarvis, who I coincidentally talked to 3 days ago and did a show with. I was not planning to have the two of you were not supposed to be in this close proximity, but as I'm sure you're very familiar with, sometimes people say, well, here's my availability, and it's just right there.
Yeah, that's just how it works sometimes, and you got to go with the flow. It could actually be kind of nice. I mean, it's nice for me because, sure, we're both kind of doing a project together. So, hey, double exposure. That's great. Appreciate it. Yeah.
No, it was a lot of fun. I was very nervous about that because I'm like, oh, this is the first person I've talked to who's testified in front of Congress. Oh, yeah. Boy. I can't twist my words up when I'm talking to him. Oh, boy.
Well, but the beautiful thing is that Jeff is just a wonderful human being, and he's super easy to talk to. And yes, he's wicked smart, and he's just a lot of fun. I love being able to podcast with him every week.
God, he held up a book. I don't know if he showed you. If he hasn't, asked him for his almanac of newspapers, which is this thick. I couldn't believe it. On the video, you see my face go like this because it's one of the biggest books I've ever seen. He's like, oh, here's a prop, and he's waving this thing around. I'm like, don't give yourself a concussion, man. That thing looks big.
Yeah. He'll put you to shame if you think about like I just don't read books like he does. And I'm pretty sure most people probably don't read books like he does. He reads so many of them. He writes books. I mean, his life is steeped in that culture. And so I don't know how you find the time. He's up to date on all the news, everything happening in all these different directions in the world of tech, and everything else that he does. It's flabbergasting to me how he's able to keep up with the volume.
Yeah, he's got more energy than I have, and he's older than I am, and I'm sitting here going, how can you ingest all this stuff and not lose your mind? But he keeps track of it, he comments on it, he understands it, he has very nuanced opinions on it, so it's impressive. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. But we're here to talk about you. Jeff's great, but I already talked to him. Now I'm here to talk to you because, shortly after we spoke the last time, there were layoffs, but you told me that you had already been planning in the background to do your own thing, to go independent. That was already kind of a plan. It just got unintentionally accelerated by market forces.
Yeah. So I mean, the way it played out was actually to my benefit because I had been conceptualizing some sort of jump into independent content creation for probably a couple of years prior to that. It wasn't like I was actively immediately ready to leave. It was just, Twit's probably not going to last until I retire, until the day I die. So it probably behooves me to know, like, what do I want to do when Twit comes to an end? And so it was really an exploration of what that would look like. And yeah, I'd say the 6 months leading up to my layoff, which happened early last December in 2023, those 6 months, and All About Android had been canceled. I could sense it, like I could smell it in the air. There was change coming. And so it really felt like the right time for me to kind of double down and get serious about kind of plotting out what that plan might be. Now, when I was laid off, I can say this now with some distance, but when I was laid off, it was probably about 2, maybe 3 weeks shy of the date that I was planning on putting in my notice. So at the end of the day, it really did kind of work out for me because instead of, to be completely blunt and honest, instead of me putting in my notice and having no buffer with which to jump to this new thing, I was laid off. I got a nice severance. They really did, go above and beyond and took care of me. And it enabled me to do what I've been doing throughout the course of the last year, and far better than if I hadn't had that. If I hadn't had that, to be quite honest, where I'm at right now, as any indication, I probably wouldn't have made it this far. I just wouldn't have had the funds to do it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that a lot of people maybe didn't understand in the community as much is that, and I've heard this from everybody who was laid off, is that it's not like you were just dumped on the sidewalk, as happens in big companies where they're like, okay, here's two
Sure, it
weeks, you're
happens.
gone. And
Yeah,
so people associate that with everything. But from my understanding, Twit is extremely attentive to the people that they've worked for. There is a genuine care there. That's why it's, I know the people who love the network are hate to see them struggling at all. But
oh
yeah,
yeah,
the thing is that advertising fell through the floor. That's everywhere. It
yeah.
just went away because there was a podcasting rush. And then, of course, as often happens, a bunch of money invested without actually thinking about what they were doing into all these bigger things. And that just ripples downwards. And suddenly
For
everybody
sure.
wants more, all the data about the people because they didn't know how to invest the money up front. So
Well, and I've
it's,
also heard people, looking at the Twit thing and being like, well, I guess this shows that their model, didn't work or didn't succeed. And I'm like, that's baloney, because it did work for 20 years. And then as happens in the world of business, and I'm certainly experiencing this on a personal level right now, there are forces, there are situations or times when you're forced as a business to reflect and say, okay, well, what's working and what isn't working? And if you choose not to do something when something isn't working, you're destined for failure. The best businesses recognize that, hopefully sooner rather than later, and make a change to correct the course. And that's what Twit has done. It worked for them for a very long time. And then they hit a point to where that studio model didn't work anymore. And I give them full credit for recognizing that and transitioning. And I have all the faith and hope in the world that this kind of new paradigm of them doing what most podcasters do, which is podcast from the corner of the bedroom, like I'm doing right now, will enable them to, yes, and what you're doing as well.
right.
Although I don't know if that's a bedroom, but anyways, yeah, point being, our homes, finding a room and just making it work. I mean, in this day and age, that is absolutely adequate. It's really more about the content and the community than it is, the fact that you're in a big studio. It's kind of an old paradigm to have the TV studio, and Twit realized that, and they made a change.
So did that make this change for you easier? Is the fact that now the idea of, okay, you're broadcasting from home is far more of a common thing? I mean, it really
Mhm.
was, but it is, like you said, it's kind of everywhere now, is the idea that
Yeah.
there's a studio, that there's a what was conceived to be a professional environment, which was always kind of a falsehood. I mean, the reality is, as you said, it's what the people are saying and it's what the content
Yeah.
is more than anything,
Sure.
because you can have a beautiful set with a bunch of airheads spewing nothing, but that's not going to be as good as
No,
somebody in a corner who
totally.
has real insight.
100%. Yeah. Sure. I mean, I think what I realize now on a personal level is that, yeah, the big kind of built up studio environment, or even on like a micro level in my situation. I have my downstairs studio. This is my upstairs studio. It's the podcast corner. It's kind of the only place in the house that I can close the door and know that no one's going to walk in. My studio downstairs is open to the entire house. And so I have to be very strategic about when I use that studio. And right now, one of my daughters happens to be home on a fall break from school. So I didn't want to, kind of burden her with, all right, be quiet for the next hour, although I do that sometimes. But what I've realized in that situation is kind of a little bit of what Twit has gone through, which is when I came out of the Twit environment, which was completely built around big TV studio, lots of large equipment, staff to manage it, all this stuff. There's a level of quality that you get out of that type of environment. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, that's what Twit was really shooting for. They wanted to be seen as a technology podcast network that had elevated quality compared to what you'd find elsewhere. And the studio really empowers that and enables that. Me going out on my own, that's the paradigm that I know. And so my initial kind of thought was, all right, well, then I've got to buy some really great cameras, and I've got to, build up a really great studio here and make it look as good as possible. And when I edit videos, I've got to really polish them and I had to do all these things. And the slow lesson that I've learned over the course of the last 9 months is that really that stuff matters a whole lot less than being authentic in your content, actually creating something that someone wants to listen to or wants to watch. And yeah, it's been a real eye opener. It's certainly for me exposed a little bit of that kind of legacy thinking, and I've had to really work, a lot of effort reprogramming myself out of that kind of old view of, no, but I've got to create this high quality, polished to the nines sort of stuff. And and switch over to, is it good enough to make people happy? Because if I attach myself to the former, I'm not going to stay in business. There's only one of me, and I'm used to the paradigm of having a lot of people and a team. You know, it used to be I created the content, and then once I was done on a set, finished my podcast, all of that work that follows, publishing, editing, you know, all the stuff that you know very well, that went off to another person, and I could continue thinking about the content and creating new things for, you know, writing new things, that sort of stuff. Now I don't have that luxury. Now it's all on me, and I have a limited amount of time in which to do it, and that's been my ongoing struggle. And let me tell you, it's been a struggle. It's really challenging.
Yeah, I was going to say, being a one person complete shop, that, you know, that I used to do a lot of heavy editing just on the audio, where I would cut every little pause out and every little and I gave up on that. Yeah. Oh, it was hours. I mean, it was hours for and that was when we were only doing shows for about an hour. Now we have shows. Our normal shows are 2.5 to 3 hours long. I cannot possibly bother to edit anything that far, because it is, as you said, most people don't really care. I think at one point there was this idea that, oh, you don't want to say, you don't want to pause, you don't want to stutter, because, you know, you want to have everything like perfectly polished. But as you said, I don't think people ever really cared as much about that as some people perceive that they did. I think, as you said,
a lot,
if something's entertaining, because there's so YouTube content now that is intentionally crappy. And what I mean is they design it to look janky and to have a lot of harsh cuts and cutting things off, and they use it for humor and other things. And I actually enjoy that, because it has made people more comfortable with, not everything has to have a perfect transition. Now, don't get me wrong. I still, because I have a heavy visual background, every little thing bothers me. I literally was doing a thing in Premiere where I was moving a lower third so that there was no gap between the bottom of a border and the lower third. Will anyone really notice that? No. But I know it's there, and so it bugs me.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. And I'll get a template in place. I mean, that's the other thing, is I think for anybody who's doing this, is start getting a workflow template so that you can quickly just slot things in and change a few things.
Absolutely.
So what were the biggest adjustments, as far as, what were the things that really hung you up when you started this, as far as, okay, I'm making the content myself. What was the most miserable point of it? Was it time management? Was it getting used to doing all the editing? What was the single worst element of it?
Worst. I mean, worst is a hard one for me to come up with, because I've been really trying to lean into curiosity in all of it. There are things that I enjoy less than others, but I'm also learning when I do them, and that's okay. Like often that's enough for me to know that, like, this might not be my favorite thing in the world, but it's important for me to learn, you know, the scope of everything. I think my biggest challenge, the thing that I actively avoid, is probably, more than anything, and I hate to say this, it's the business side of it. I am really comfortable with the content, and I'm really comfortable with creating content and being creative. Like, I love creativity. That's like at my core. That's what really speaks to me. And in my previous roles at CNET and Twit, I was often allowed to just be the creative guy, and I never really had to go out and, you know, email for potential sponsors, or set up a sponsorship web page, or all those things, setting up ad revenue deals and that stuff. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, and this is the real stinger about where I'm at right now, is like, I can't do this forever. I can't do it forever and not make a living, which is where I've largely been the last 9 months, is not making a living. And meanwhile, I'm grateful for where I'm at, because I had a large group of people from Twit follow me over to give me that, like, initial cushion. You, by the way, one of them. Thank you so much to you and everyone else who's really, you know, kind of stepped forward and offered support, both financially and, you know, emotionally in some cases. But there is a point at which it's just like, I can't keep bleeding, you know, our own money to try and make this work. And yet, the thing that would enable this business to work is the business stuff. It is the relation, you know, reaching out to potential sponsors and doing all that stuff. It just so happens that that's the stuff that I enjoy the least. And so even when I commit myself to it and say, all right, today it's nothing but this, I just have this tendency, to, find another thing that's like that I attach to it and say, oh, well, before I do that, I really need to do this because this is critical to be in place before that happens. Then I focus all my attention on that. And I think to a certain subliminal side of me, that's just more interesting to me than that is. And what ends up happening is I don't end up making any progress on the business side of it. And that's really frustrating. That's I think the hardest thing that I've had to deal with, for sure.
Yeah, I think about people who try to make a go of it on YouTube and monetize. And now our channel's not monetized. I'm not going to even bother. I know I will never have enough over there. I don't think, unless some miraculous thing happens. So I've never been interested in monetizing it. But we do movie reviews, and I was playing clips from movies in some of the early ones, and they just come down on you like a hammer. And I'm not monetizing, and I'm sitting here going, I'm trying to get people to watch your movies, and you're saying I can't play this anywhere. I don't know how people do it, because it feels like many of these platforms, outside of things like Patreon, which are engineered to allow people to try to make a living. Those are specifically made for creators, or at least, to try to help them. But many of these big platforms are actively, in many ways, I feel like, fighting the people whose creations make them successful. So I don't know how people do it, as far as there seem to be so many headwinds against it, just from the fact that creativity is tough to make a living at, period. Let's start with that. Creativity is severely undervalued in general. But then many of these mechanisms that you think would help you make money so that you can keep creating and focusing on that, which should be the point of a creator's attention, shouldn't be, as you said, 80 emails. Can we set up a deal with this? Can we revenue, whatever, strategize, vertical integration, whatever they are? I don't know any of these terms because I don't do any marketing. But that shouldn't be the focus of a creator. It should be, well, what's the thing that people want me to make? What are they responding to? What can I make more of? That would be the goal, right? 8 hours, well, maybe not 8 hours, but many hours of your day on the creative side, as opposed to I have to spend a whole day emailing a bunch of people so that I can hopefully be able to pay bills.
Yeah.
It just feels like the whole ecosystem is inverted to what you would think it would be to encourage creativity. But that's what it sounds like, right? I mean, you have more experience with this than certainly I do, because I've never tried to make money at it. I've always just done this for fun, which is why it can be fun for me, and I don't have to have a whole day where I want to put my head through a wall because I'm not getting a response. Does it start to sap something from you, or do you really just compartmentalize that and say, okay, this is this day, it's going to be miserable because it's all going to be business side as much as I can do, and then I know the next 3 days are I'm doing this show, and that's going to recharge me? Is that what I assume that's how you have to handle it, right?
I mean, if I'm honest, it does sap something from me to have to do that. At the same time, I'm also a realist and recognize that, it all takes work. To get into creativity, a creative, something that you're doing on a creative scale and hoping to make a living out of it, and not accept that there are things that are attached to that are not necessarily enjoyable in the same way. That's just a part of the fact of what we do. You have to go out and knock on doors in certain industries. And I think creativity, what I'm realizing is, with creativity, that's also the truth. Either that, or you do something that taps into the zeitgeist, or you could call it virality or whatever, in a way that kind of propels what you're creating into a new kind of spotlight of sorts. And that's something that I'd say one of the lessons that I've learned, or one of the things that I've noticed, maybe not lessons that I've learned, but things that I've noticed about what I've been doing since I was laid off at Twit, is that, on the podcast side of things, not really seeing a lot of growth. The podcasts themselves have reasonable numbers that mostly kind of came out of the launch, and it's really hard to get new people through the door, right? I've got all these people that have been exposed to me through the Twit paradigm and CNET, and that's amazing, and I'm so grateful for that. But the only way I can ensure a business out of this is to find new people. And podcast, as we know, it takes years to grow a podcast. It's not just like I'm going to do a podcast for 3 months and it's going to go through the roof and I'm immediately going to have this cash cow that blah, blah, blah. Like it takes years. It just does. And, but one thing on the flip side of that I've noticed is that the place that I see regular growth is YouTube. And that's because YouTube has algorithms that they use to kind of put creators' content into new people's eyes. And, that algorithm / audience is working really hard for creators if you know how to work with it. So any of the growth that I've seen in the past 9 months, outside of the initial launches of the podcast, have really been YouTube, which has me really, if I'm completely honest, because I told you before the show, like I'm at a really interesting point right now where I'm recognizing 100% I do not have unlimited time to make this work. I am going to reach a point, and I'm still trying to figure out where that is, where I can no longer see if I can make a go of it. You know what I mean? And so I have to look at things and go, yeah, I'm kind of in a point of position of where Twit was at, which is like, I have to look at my business. I have to go, what am I spending all my time on? And is it worth my time to spend my time on that versus something else that might have more possibility of making it work? If I have a limited amount of time left to make this work, how can I ensure that I use that the most effective way possible? And that's really where my mind is at right now is, okay, I might have to make some changes and I don't want to, but I might have to if I truly want this to work. Otherwise, I might have to go work for someone else, which isn't the end of the world either, but it is the reality. It's just where I'm at.
Changes meaning changes to the actual shows, like the formats, guest type of thing?
Potentially. I mean,
Okay.
I need to look at what really at the end of the day, I need to look at like how much of my time is going into each individual product or project.
Yeah.
And if I'm spending all that time, am I getting a return out of that time? Or is that time better spent doing something else that has a higher likelihood of getting some return? And yeah, I mean, I haven't made any decisions there yet, but like at this point, I'm really realizing like, okay, it's time to, beep or get off the pot.
You can swear. Don't worry. You're allowed to swear on this show.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
All right. I'll remember that for the forward, but I don't need to repeat that, but because I think you got the point, but
no, and that's, I feel
that's
like
how business works. That's how business works. If something's not working, you make a change and you try and make it work.
Yeah, I understand that too. That's one of the things I think about because I've never bothered to look at profitability for our show. Never. It has never even entered my mind because I just have never perceived it ever being able to make, even when there was money in podcasting, supposedly, and you could get advertising. I mean, it always said there was, and of course that was always 90% a myth unless you were a celebrity or you had just the right, or you managed to hit something that people just got interested in. There's always the hot things that come out of nowhere. Those do happen. But I'd get these emails. Oh, I have a guest. They can talk. And I love the ones that start off, I'm loving your show. Here's a guest that can work for you. Can we set something up? And it's somebody I literally got one the other day for a SaaS expert, software as a service. And I'm sitting here going, if you've ever listened to our show, I am the last person you want to have sitting down with a SaaS expert because I'll fall asleep in 10 minutes. I don't care, or the Manscaped ones where they're like, oh, we're willing to advertise. And I was against that at first, but then my co-host was like, what do you care? Sell it. Who cares what they want? If they want to give you money, take it. I'm like, all right, sure. But it feels like a lot of people are running into that now because there is a lot of turbulence within podcasting specifically, but also there are now so many platforms, with TikTok and everything else. It feels like you have to publish and create content, and it's not like you can use the same stuff everywhere in the way it felt like earlier on when everybody was trying to copy each other. Well, the same video or whatever, you would just spam that everywhere. But no, TikTok wants one thing and YouTube wants another and Instagram wants a third thing. And you have to at some point, because I know people who've tried to do it all, and they're like, okay, well, I can take this, and if I do it the right way, I can alter it. And I'm like, you're going to burn out. You're going to burn out quick because you just can't maintain that pace. So I understand that there is that tension there.
There is a pace. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And do you perceive a point where you can have a balance between the stuff you really want to do? And is that what you're trying to figure out now is, okay, this is revenue generation and this is the fun stuff? Because it feels like for some people that becomes the balance is, okay, it's a 50-50 split. I know this is going to get views and traffic and it will get the ads, but then I'm going to do this because I just want to do this. And some people seem to be making that work in some way, form.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it is probably finding a balance point that works. Yeah, I mean, when I look at my week right now, let's say I've got 5 days a week that I work. Honestly, I'm probably working more like 6 days a week. And some of those days, sometimes they're 16-hour days. And if and I would say that often 3 of my 5 open days, if I'm talking Monday to Friday, 3 of my 5 days are podcast. Got Android Faithful, which we didn't really talk about. It's not my podcast. I share that with a few other folks on the DTNS network, but we've got Android Faithful one day, got AI Inside one day, we've got the Techsploder podcast on another day.
Gotta
That
waste an hour
leaves
with this guy who's not generating anything for
no, no, no,
anybody.
no, no. And
No,
I don't
I get
think,
it. No, that's me
yeah,
kidding. I'm kidding. I
yeah,
understand. That's just
okay, good, because I really do value this
no,
sort
no.
of stuff.
That's
I love being invited to talk with folks like you about this stuff and just in general. Like that's the beauty of podcasting is it's very much kind of like this. I come over here and talk to you, and you come on and talk to me, and like there's a relationship / community about it that I love. It's one of the things that I love most about podcasting is the community aspect of it. So no, I do highly value taking the time to do this stuff. But going back to the time that's remaining, right? Like then I'm left with my Monday and my Friday, and the business stuff is really important. But then I've also got this YouTube page that I've got to feed with other content because that's another prong of what I've been trying to do. And that requires, kind of touching on what you were talking about earlier, that requires conceptualizing a review or whatever the heck that's going to be, kind of writing out my points, recording all the pieces, both A-roll and B-roll, throwing it on a timeline, editing it better than just the sloppy one pass thing, which, what I've realized for me in editing, probably because I'm a little slower than others, but it's going to take me a good, if it's to the level of quality that I like, it's going to take me a good 6, 7, 8 hours to do it right on, a highly produced kind of thing. I mean, that eats up, if I didn't have the business right there, that would easily eat up those 2 days and then some. And then you're talking about the shorts, you're talking about the different social media platforms and how how you choose to market what you do there. Are you using TikTok to be authentic and to record, kind of behind the scenes, like, hey, today I'm doing blah blah blah, or are you using it as a promotional platform, so you're pulling out clips of your podcast? That takes time. There's all of these avenues take so much time, even when you have tools that are intended to make it easier, which they do. Like there's an AI clipping service that I use called Opus Clip, and it's fantastic. It's all in the browser. It's basically I send a link to my latest YouTube video, and it scours it, and it comes up with 20 to 30 little clips pulled from the transcript that it's created, and you have your own timeline there and everything. So it does streamline the thing. But it still takes time. Like if you're given 20 to 30 clips, it still takes time to preview all of those clips and figure out, put a heart next to the ones that you want to go back to. And then you open them up and you do the edit. And I mean, you're talking half a day just to do some of the promotional stuff on a single episode. And
and I assume you have to pay for that too, right? Is Opus
for
Clips
sure.
free?
No, it is not free.
That is the great thing that I've realized. I'm like, oh no, I hate how well Zoom works for some of the stuff I'm doing because I have to pay for that if I want to keep using it. But it works really well. That's the worst part about some of these really great tools is when you realize, oh, this makes it so much easier, except now I have to pay for it. So especially if every dollar is being tracked as far as, well, am I making enough to cover this? Then finding a service that you like that you have to pay for almost sucks. It's almost better to have not known about it and just do the work because it wasn't costing you anything but your time. And we all, as creators, devalue our time. It's one of the worst things that almost all creators do is we don't value our time enough, which is just, it's a human thing. But it does, there's that point where you sit there and go, oh no, this tool saves me like 4 hours. It costs $40 a month. What do I want to do here? Because I need to cover that because you have to, that's the other thing. I think a lot of people, they look at these videos and they think, oh, wow, well, they must be really good. They put these together in a couple hours. There's nothing to it. There's a ton to it. This is all the time that you put in, which has value, and you have to get a return for it. I think this is exactly what you're talking about. And that's, again, why I'm kind of happy that I never bothered to monetize because I think I would have just stopped because I've I don't know how your parents react to it, but my mom's like, why do you still do this show every week? You're not making any money from it. Well, because it's fun.
Because I enjoy it.
Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. But if it was a business, I would have been under a year in. I would have been gone. It would never have happened.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you probably read out there if you go looking into, starting a content creator or getting into becoming a full-time content creator, a lot of times what you will find in people's advice and everything is don't leave your job and become a content creator. Like, and expect for that to be, like you may be great at what you do, but just up and leaving and saying, all right, I'm done at my job. I am now a content creator. I'm full-time. I'm going to create content. It is going to take a long time, except for the random, like we were talking about earlier, if you're a celebrity or you have a flash in the pan moment that, suddenly gains you a lot of subscribers or whatever the case may be. It's almost always better to start something like that while you're gainfully employed and do it on the side. And yes, you kind of have to hustle to make that happen. But then at a certain point, you might reach that inflection point where it's like, okay, now, I might not match my current income, but I'm getting close. I can afford to cut that off and now really focus on it. And, and so then I look at kind of my situation and part of it is that I didn't really have much of a choice because I was laid off. So it was kind of the perfect time to do it. But I have to be okay with the fact that this is kind of common knowledge. It's not easy to just say, I am now a full-time content creator and to make that work. I was talking with, a friend of mine who is at this point a pretty well-known content creator, and I don't know if he would want me to share this, so I'm not going to say his name, but and he basically said, it took me 2.5, almost 3 years of focusing on content creation to make it viable as a full-timer. And he said the only reason I could do that is because my wife makes a lot of money and she was willing to support me during that time. And I was fortunate to have that. And now he's doing great. Do you have 3 years? I don't have 3 years. That much I know. I wish I did. And then there's the other aspect, which is kind of the stress level of things, which is, like I said, I'm often working 18-hour days, and I do it because I truly, in my heart of hearts, want it to work. And I want to kind of see some success out of it and go, okay, this is working. But I feel the stress of it all, and I'm not getting any younger, so I have to really ask myself, okay, at what point is it just kind of too much? Because there are some weekends, where talk about protecting your time. I have a family. I have 2 daughters and a wonderful wife, and we have, we love to go camping and doing all sorts of things. And sometimes I feel the pressure of, well, I want to do that, but I really need to get this out. And, yeah, I don't know. As I get older, that becomes less and less appealing, I think.
Yeah, the balancing of time is, because I think a lot of people look at this stuff like, oh, it must be fun to do a podcast. And don't get me wrong. It is fun.
Yeah,
this conversation is fun.
Yeah.
Then the work starts. Then it's okay. Now I have to, like you said, put this in the timeline and go through it. And that is, I think, and this is kind of my larger point, and it's something that I'm actually happy that you're talking about, is all of what's behind the things that people consume. And I think that's the right word for it, because often people consume it. And I've said this, I'm sure you've said it in some version, is support these people because it doesn't just come out of nowhere. That was the Twit lesson. That's the lesson with anything with Patreon and people. And there is a guilt. You probably have this too, where I sit there and go, I want to support everybody I like on Patreon, and I don't have the money to do it. And then I feel bad because if I have to reduce the thing for one, and then because somebody said, oh, you got a Patreon subscriber. And I said, that doesn't mean anything. I put out more money than that Patreon will ever take in, which I'm happy to do because
it's a vote of confidence.
It is. And you want to see people that you enjoy that what they do, you want to see them keep doing it. And that's I harp on that a lot, where I'm like, okay, if you like what somebody does, support them in some way, whatever that is. And otherwise, it could just go away. I think a lot of people probably thought the Twit would run forever because, oh, it's Leo Laporte, and he was on TV, and he knows what he's doing, and he has the studio. And it's like, well, it's not that simple. Nothing is. And then there is the other thing on top of that where, there's a lot of people have the similar example you talked about, where if my wife didn't make this much money, I probably couldn't keep doing this. But luckily, it offsets the loss of doing this. So I only have to earn this much and we're fine. And that's a pretty common thing that I've talked to a lot of people, where it is one of the spouses is able to keep things floating enough that they can take a loss for a while. Not forever and not a severe one, but okay, if I miss it this much, it's okay. And like you said, there is a point where you get to a judgment point of,
Yeah.
all right, something has to move one way or another.
Something
what
has
will
to
that
give.
be?
Yep. Absolutely.
And I'm sure you don't want to stop doing what you enjoy. Nobody does. And also, this is how I look at it. I don't ever expect to make any money from doing any of these shows. I really don't. That dream sailed years ago, like year one. But I sit here and go, well, I still want to produce a good show. So if somebody does find it, they see something and they realize I didn't just half-ass it. I put the effort in. And I assume that's the same thing for you, is okay, if I have to alter something, there's still a body of work. There is that value to what you've done before, right? Where you can say, well, even if it didn't necessarily work out monetarily, okay, I didn't make a living off it, but that work stands for itself. It is good work. I did that work, right? I mean, that's in there, I assume, for you.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I feel very, I feel very proud of the work that I've done through my career, but also in the last year. Like, I was just talking with my wife about this. I am a very risk averse person. This is something that I've realized about myself, especially in the last handful of years. Incredibly risk averse. So the fact that I even chose to do this to begin with, I think it's good to shine the spotlight on yourself sometimes. Everyone should do it in their lives and recognize when they've done something that they're proud of. And I'm proud of that. The fact that this was a very risky thing for me to attempt to do. And there was no certainty whatsoever. And yet, it kind of contrary to, I'd say, a lot of other examples in my life where when faced with the risky proposition, I tend to walk the other way because I don't want to risk what I have. In this case, I turned towards it. And I see that as a total win. I see that as a huge accomplishment for myself, and I'm proud of that. So at least there's that. At least I've learned that about myself. At least I'm proud of the content that I'm creating. I'm not putting out anything that I'm like, oh, this is just to appeal to the algorithm or whatever. Anything that I've released, I'm pretty darn proud of, and I'm happy that I did it. And it has legs beyond the initial launch of it. Like the Techsploder podcast is just conversations with friends in the world of technology about how they not only got into technology, but how that spark of passion of technology was ignited for them, which is something that I think all of us as tech fans share, even if our stories are very different. That's kind of the idea of the Techsploder podcast. And any of those interviews are going to be enjoyable to listen to, and I'm happy that I had them, and I learned so much about everyone that I talked to, regardless of if there were no more interviews, let's say, like, I'd still be very proud of those. And yeah, so that certainly lives on. And there is the need to also figure out, like, if there is a business to be made or run, then you also kind of have to figure out, like, well, what is the thing that's going to work for the wider amount of people? And I think I don't know. I think that's kind of a little bit about where I'm at right now is really just kind of reimagining, like, okay, is this working? Is this serving me anymore from being able to contribute to the family on a financial sense? Because I've never in my life not been able to do that, or not been in a position to do that. So this is also a first for me as well. And, all businesses have to reevaluate. And that's, I think, where I'm at right now. And actually, that reminds me of something that I wanted to mention to you, that is something that I've learned about content creation that I didn't really understand or really conceptualize going into it, is the fact that if you are going into content creation with the expressed idea of making a living from it, it must be treated like a business. And I'm not saying you'll be successful when you do that, or not, but I am saying it is in fact a business. I was feeling really bad for the first handful of months about the fact that I was making basically $0 after spending my entire adulthood making money and contributing to the family. My wife, who has started a couple of successful businesses in the fitness industry, reminded me. She's like, you know what? This is how small businesses start. When you start a small business, very often you do not make any money for a while, for a long time before you start making money. And that was a hard one for me to understand in the beginning. I really thought like, oh, well, I've got to prove this in a month. And there's just no way to do that unless you're lucky. And once I started looking at it as, okay, well, what are the business things that are required? That kind of changed my outlook. Now, the flip side of that is, okay, well, then once you decide or identify the things that work for a business, then you got to actually do them. And that's, where it comes full circle back to me, which is that I don't, the business side of it is not as enjoyable. As essential as it is, it just doesn't come as naturally to me. And that's,
by the way, marketing tip for anybody who wants to do this: don't go 40 minutes without mentioning the podcast of the person you're interviewing, because that makes you a terrible podcaster. Because I just realized, I'm like, I never brought up the show except at the beginning of it. No, because I do want to promote it. That's one of the reasons I try to take what minuscule influence I have and be like, oh, people should be seeing this person, seeing their stuff. So the Techsploder,
you mentioned it at the top. I'm not worried.
I did, but I like to bring it up anyway. I mean, just to remind people, and I'll have links to it in the show notes and everything like that. So initially it was just Techsploder, right? Were you the AI Inside that came later? That was quickly, but was that always planned, or was it your kind of foundation was Techsploder and you recognized, well, there's interest in AI. If I can do a show with that, it might drive the traffic. Maybe that was a business decision, which would be a smart one right now.
It's a little bit of both, but the real timeline was I got laid off. I immediately joined Android Faithful. They immediately had a place for me on the cast. And then a couple of months later launched AI Inside, actually before Techsploder. I had launched the YouTube channel, I think. I'm trying to remember if the YouTube channel launched with AI Inside. But yeah, AI Inside was my first podcast launch. The reason that launched was because Jeff Jarvis and I, my co-host Jeff Jarvis, were kind of workshopping that exact podcast for Club Twit. At the time that I got laid off.
Because you had done a series of like hangouts with Jeff where you talked about AI, right? And it wasn't Club only?
For all intents and purposes, we were doing the podcast in Club Twit. We just hadn't officially launched it. And I think in hindsight, looking at it, I realized the official launch didn't happen because I think they saw the writing on the wall. It didn't make sense to put all of that investment of time and resources and everything into making it official. But from our perspective, Jeff and I's perspective, we had been doing that podcast for probably 5 months. And so then, when I was laid off, I asked, I just basically said like, hey, would you mind if I took the name and the podcast and we launched it? And they were awesome. They gave me basically everything I asked for. I could tell that they did not want to let me go, and they made that abundantly clear. And so, I was graciously offered the ability to continue this thing that I started developing inside of Twit. And so that made the most sense to launch it. On top of what you're talking about, AI is a very big kind of big aspect of technology right now. There's a lot of curiosity. There's a lot of interest. There's also a lot of pushback. It's kind of got it all as far as lightning in a bottle sort of thing. And so it made sense to launch something like that. The Techsploder podcast came a little bit later, probably a couple of months later, when I basically took my YouTube channel and rebranded it essentially as Techsploder. Previous to that, it was the Yellow Gold Studios, which is kind of the name of my content company. But that didn't really say anything about what you're going to find on a YouTube channel. Like Yellow Gold Studios could be anything, and I wanted something that really said tech and technology, and Techsploder kind of seemed to be it. So I launched the YouTube channel. A week later, I launched the podcast, and it's been going kind of ever since.
I can't believe you got the name. That seems like such a great name. I can't believe nobody had it.
Dude, tell me about it.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where I specifically remember this was while I was still at Twit. I was out for a walk. I think it was post all about Android. being canceled, and I was out for a walk with my dogs, and suddenly the word Techsploder popped in my head, and I was like, there's no way this isn't taken, and I did the hover search, and techsploder.com, it's totally available. I did the YouTube search. Oh, no one has it. Like I was blown away. I was like, wait a minute, this makes too much sense. How did someone miss this? But yeah, very happy about that.
Yeah, there's two that I got, two URLs, because I do that once in a while. I think of something like, oh, look, see if there's a URL.
Oh yeah, me too.
Me too. Don't need another friggin' URL. But supportourshow.com, nobody had that. And I thought, well, if you're going to say to somebody, here's how you could support our show, go to supportourshow.com. I'm like, that's so obvious.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
So I got that one, and I got cyberpunkradio.com, which that one is more just for me, because I'm like, nobody has Cyberpunk Radio. That's such a great name. I'll never do anything
it is a good
with it
name.
Except redirect. But the support our show one, I got a different one. I can't remember. I was such an idiot. I misspelled it. That one somebody had, but it was something similar to that. And I did two shows where I'm like, I got this URL and nobody else had it, you morons. And then at one point I went, oh, I put two R's in that word. That's why, because I don't know how to spell. That's why nobody had it.
Wah. But you do actually have support.
Yeah, supportourshow.com.
Like, legitimate.
Yes, that one was free.
One.
And and I just sit there and go, that seems like literally that's because I used to open up and tell, okay, here's how you support it, blah, 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 blah. Go here.
It's a whole thing. Like, totally.
So now I'm like, if you want to support our show, go to supportourshow.com, and I'm done. It's so nice. It's one sentence and it's over with.
Yeah.
Well, as we wind down, because I know you have limited time, this is one thing this was always my goal, and I always forget about it with most of my shows, is to offer people, what's one thing you never get to talk about on your shows that you wish you could, whether it was just something you enjoy, but it never fit the format, something that you sit there and go, man, I've never been, this is my interest. This is something I love, or something I just like to share with people. Because our whole show is so open reign, I can do anything. So we bring up whatever we want, but a lot of people have certain formats, and you sit there and go, man, I never get to talk about this thing, and I really love it. I know I'm springing this on you, so if you know.
Yeah, it's always hard to come up with something, right off the cuff on something like that. I mean, I think the thing that I rarely get a chance to talk about because technology and music don't always intersect is just the musical creativity. It's really it's something that's really near and dear to my heart, and that is and actually it ties in kind of with some of the stuff that we've been talking about today, which is from a creative standpoint, music production just makes my heart happy and makes me happy, and when I'm doing it I feel a little more complete than when I'm not. And the past year, I've had very little of it just because I haven't had any time for it. And, that makes me sad. I would love to find some way to make more time for music. I always kind of have, I'll put it this way. A couple of years ago, I basically have a friend, wonderful friend, who has a property out in Albion, which is along the coastline of Northern California. It's this beautiful, beautiful place. And he has this amazing property. There's actually 2 houses on his plot of land. And he had at one point had said, hey, if you ever want to go out to this property and just hang out or take the family or whatever, it's open to you. Just let me know. And I had the idea, I'd always wanted to make an escape by myself with my music gear and go to a cabin of some sort and go there with the expressed intention to write an album in a cabin and be like, no, you know what? I'm here for a week. I have nothing else to do, but I'm surrounded by all this, the environment that's inspiring. I'm surrounded by all the instruments and the technology that I brought to facilitate recording things. And maybe I don't finish the album, but maybe it inspires me to write a bunch of the bones, the pieces of these things that I can then go home and finish. And so I finally did it. I asked him if I could do that, and he said, oh, absolutely. I ended up going for 5 days. It was so wonderful. I went through the process of walking through the 2-story place and identifying what is the room for the studio. Okay, where's the vocal booth going to be? Okay, where's the and like piecing it all together and getting it all right. And I had my food downstairs when I needed it, and it was just beautiful. And I ended up recording 6 or 7 songs, and I have a whole album's worth at this point of songs that here we are almost 3 years later, and I have not released them, primarily because I don't have the time to put the finishing touches. They aren't quite there, but they're close. And they just need focused time, focused attention. And, this past year, I would have hoped that I could, because I'm working for me now, make the time to do that. But I'm so consumed with other things that I just don't have any more time. Like, it's not just time. I don't have any more me left to give it. And so I think that's something that's really top of mind for me, is not to let perfect be the enemy of good enough, and to just make the time to get in there, finish them enough, and get another album out, which is something that I haven't done. I think Fever Dreamer came out, I think, 2017. And I just find like recording and releasing albums is a really good, it's almost like journal writing for me. It's like I can listen to an album of music that I've created, and it takes me back to the place that I was at. I think I just heard an animal. I don't know if my dog's in here. I didn't realize that. It takes me back to that place in time. And it's, my dog is totally sleeping and whimpering underneath the bed.
Oh, that's fine. I'm used to that with my dog.
A dream.
She'll go crazy when she's dreaming. I'm like, what is going on? But yeah, that's fine.
That's so funny. I didn't even know she was in here until just now. Anyways, and I've gone through a lot the last couple of years, and so I really want to get that album done. And so that's something I don't really find a lot of opportunity to talk about, even though it's a really big part of my life.
I was going to say, you could do like live streams of the mastering sessions, that type of thing, because I know for me, I like watching stuff of people who create stuff that I have no knowledge of more than the stuff that I know, because then I'm just sitting there going, well, yeah, I wouldn't do it that way. But like I watch Ant Pruitt's creator things where he's doing photo. I can't do any of this photo adjustment stuff. I don't know I know what a histogram is, and I know what he's talking about, sort of, but what he sees and how he adjusts things, I find that stuff fascinating.
Yeah. It's fun to watch someone in their zone and in their rhythm.
Yeah. And when they clearly know something you don't, I don't find that fearful. I'm actually impressed by it when I see something that to me looks like sorcery and somebody else can do it, when they can make something out of it. And they explain it, and they have to explain it in a clear way. Some people do get a little hung up on the technical stuff, and they'll lose you if they really get too deep into it. But you find somebody who knows how to talk in plain language that says, okay, well, this is why. You want this to do this, and that's what this little meter does, and this is how it is. Even if I'll never adjust a photo or I'll never write a song, I enjoy watching people to know how that sound. A friend of mine's an audio engineer who's worked like Rush and big name people. Mm-hmm. And I would ask him things like, what is that? How did they do this? He's like, oh, they just recorded the vocals twice and put an echo effect on it. To him, it's nothing. Yeah. To me, I'm like, how does a person make their voice sound like that? And he's like, oh, I can explain it to you. It's that. And he just says it. I'm like, yeah, that's because you do it all the time. But it's fascinating to me because now when I hear it, I think about songs and I'll hear something similar and go, is that or is it something else? Or like when I read about Led Zeppelin, kind of the same thing. They went to a house and they were just setting up speakers and amps in weird hallways. And that's how they got these sounds. Yeah. And then you realize that's how these sounds are produced. Yeah. I like knowing that stuff because I will never set up an amp at a hallway and play a guitar. I have no ability for it. But it's fascinating when somebody talks about it and explains, well, this is why that sounds this way. It's because they're recording the mics here, the amp's there, and they're taking the reverb off of the hallways or putting an amp in a toilet or whatever because the sound is what they wanted. That stuff's fascinating. So I enjoy watching that stuff and listening to creators who do stuff I don't do. So
yeah, even if you don't do those techniques, you learn, like going on the example that you're talking about, you learn how to be a more critical listener of the music that you're listening to instead of a passive, like, oh, I like that song, I don't like that song. Now suddenly you have a better understanding of the process and the effort or the the attention to detail that goes into creating every minor kind of what seems like a minute piece of that song was probably sweated over and deliberated over, or there was some sort of technique that went into making that the way it was, or the choice to include it versus not, or there's a million different directions in the world of audio production creativity, and I've found that it makes listening to music a lot more enjoyable when I know how it was, some of the techniques and how it was made. And then as a musician and as a producer of sorts of my own music, I can then listen to some of these songs and go, oh, I think I have a sense of how that was done. Maybe I want to replicate that in my own, attempt and stuff. And it kind of opens up the field of creativity, which at the end of the day is what insanely inspires me.
Well, let's end on an inspirational note then, because I know we're at time, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on. I will tell everybody techsploder.com or at Techsploder on YouTube. Go support Jason's work. Watch AI Inside, because I want to see you keep doing the stuff that you're doing. I enjoy it. And in some form, I'm sure you will. I think what you find is most people, they may do it in a different form, but they're going to keep doing stuff that they really enjoy doing. So whatever avenue that is, I look forward to it. And thanks again for coming on. It's fun.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate your support, not just, for inviting me on the podcast, but you've been incredibly supportive of everything that I've been doing, especially in the last year, from beyond the last year, but especially in the last year. I've seen you in our chat rooms and throwing around super chats and all that kind of stuff. And I know I also speak for Jeff and saying thank you for your support. Really do appreciate it.
Sure. So again, techsploder.com, at Techsploder on YouTube for all of our back content, so you can hear me ramble on for hours and hours about nothing important, because it never is. That's ozonenightmare.com. And thank you for listening/watching. And I'm sorry, I can't do anything about this, but this is what they want on video, folks.
I was going to say, they asked for video. This is what they get.
People want to see. Oh, we want to see you. There you go. Revel in it. All right, Jason, thanks again. Everybody else, take care.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody.
We'll talk to you next time. Take it easy, everybody.